Hello, good day to one and all. So this is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Mancheri. So today we are going to deal with the essay written by Gabriel Diatriche, and the title of the essay is Women, Ecology and Culture. So this is a theoretical essay. So before we get into the essay, we'll have a brief biographical discussion of the author. So this is Gabrielle Diatriche. She was born in 1943 and she grew up in Germany. She was born into the post-World War period, which was not really a nice time to live in. So she was actually in a miasmic atmosphere. Her key interest was in feminism and sociology. She completed her research at the University of Berlin and her area was in Aztec religion. Currently, she is working as a sociology professor at Madurai, Tamil Nadu. So this is about Gabriel Dietrich. So let's move on to the essay, which is titled as Women, Ecology and Culture. So before we start, a few things to remind you. First of all, this is a theoretical essay, which means this has got so many theories compressed into this. There are different names of authors and books which you have to remember, certain technical terms as well. And theoretical essays are not something which you can read and enjoy unless you have a passion for reading these kind of essays. So what I'm planning to do here is to give you the capsule form of the entire essay. So we are not going to deal the essay like word by word or line by line. Instead, we would be looking at the main concepts, some of the important technical terms, some major works related with the essay, and some important titles. Because if you can remember and if you can understand the concept and remember these technical terms, definitely that will help you from the exam point of view. So let's start with the essay, and the original essay runs into 23-24 pages. So I shall upload the essay as well in the comment box. So let's start with the essay, Women, Ecology and Culture by Gabriel Dietrich. So Dietrich actually begins the essay by talking about the relationship between ecology and culture. Now sometimes when you look at this title, you will get a feeling that how are these three terms getting connected? Women, ecology and culture. And throughout this essay, Dietrich is actually trying to draw a connective link among these three terms, women, ecology, and culture. So she begins by stating that when we talk about ecology and culture, there are two kinds of problems that we face today. The first is the problem of survival and identity, and the second, the limits of physical and spiritual endurance. Now, what is this ecological crisis? How can you explain this term, ecological crisis? So, in simple terms, it is a crisis which is happening to the ecology. Now, for example, drought, flood. Now, I needn't tell you more about flood because, as Malayalis, as Keralites, flood is something which we had experienced continuously for 2-3 years. So, when there is a drought, when there is a flood, when there is a pesticide attack, we all know about the endosulfan attack and how children who are born today, even today, are going through a lot of deformities. So, soil salinity, waterlogging, so all these natural problems can really affect the survival condition of people. So, all these can be considered as ecological crisis. Now, the question comes, how can culture be a part of ecological crisis? Now, there is something called cultural crisis, which means the categorization that is coming in communities, how people are categorized, how discrimination is still existing in our communities. For example, the condition of Dalits and Adivasis. Maybe if you look at the news channels every day, you can see every single day you can hear the news about the premature deaths of small children in places like Attapadi. So there is starvation, there is malnutrition. So, in one way or the other way, this is somewhere connected with ecology. So, ecological and cultural crises have always affected women. So, this is how we are connecting ecology and culture finally towards the other end, women. So, ecological crisis, they are closely related with cultural crisis. As I told you, how the segregated people are suffering because of malnutrition, starvation, again, natural problems. So, ecological and cultural crises have always affected women. They are considered as the worst victims. For example, if there is water scarcity, the person who is most affected in a household definitely would be the female. So, again, losing the traditional skills. Now, with the advancement of technology and the progressing kind of science, there are lots of traditional skills that women have lost. Now, see, even men have lost these skills. For example, the small scale entrepreneurs cannot have a space in today's world. So even men are affected. There is no disagreement on that. But if you look at it from a feminist perspective, women can be considered as the worst victims. Again, communal rights, freedom from culture, freedom from religion, all these are actually affecting the women folk. So the author here is actually suggesting two options to overcome this. The first one is how to go beyond victimization. There should be some road for women to escape this victimization. The second thing is using their traditional skills to reverse the current situation. Now, one thing that the author suggests here is that women's traditional skills have always been in harmony with nature, women's skills, and they are totally different from patriarchal methods. So, how this is connected with patriarchy, we will look at it in the coming slides. Now, before we get into the real gist of the essay, there are certain things that you have to remember because this essay is dependent on so many other works which had come previously. Now, Vandana Shiva's staying alive because a lot of agree arguments and a lot of suggestions have been taken from this text by Vandana Shiva. Now, again, there is Romila Thapar's interview, which is again following the same kind of pattern. Then there is another important book which you have to remember, Patriarchy and Accumulation on a World Scale, which is written by Maria Mice. So, Vandana Shiva's Staying Alive and Maria Mice Patriarchy and Accumulation on a World Scale, these are the two books that Diatriche is completely depending upon. In the initial part of the essay, she quotes from these two texts to substantiate her statement, but there are areas where the author is also disagreeing with some points suggested by Vandana Shiva and Maria Mice. Now, there is also another text by Ashish Nandi which is related with colonialism. So, automatically, you will be having a doubt like, how is colonialism getting connected with this? We'll get into that in the coming slide. So, in totality, in the introductory part, the author says that there is massive environmental destruction, and this has come to a stage where this is becoming irreversible. So, a feminist kind of perspective is given to this environmental destruction so that a deeper analysis can be done. So, moving on to the next slide, ecological crisis, capitalism, patriarchy, and colonialism. So, how is ecological crisis getting connected with these three terms? Now, see, this is quite simple. If you look at these three concepts like capitalism, patriarchy, and colonialism, in all these three terms, there is something called the oppressor and the oppressed. Now, when capitalism comes up, we can see when industrialization came up, a lot of small scale shopkeepers and entrepreneurs really suffered. So, in a way, there is oppression happening. There is an oppressor, there is the oppressed group. Same thing happens with patriarchy. As literature students, I needn't tell you more about that. And how about colonialism? The same pattern works even in colonialism because it's like there is a colonizer and then there is a colonized. So the dominant group and the oppressed group. So, Diatriche establishes a connection among these three concepts capitalism, patriarchy, and colonialism. So, she argues that capitalist kind of countries they are really suffering from these ecological problems. But at the same time, she says even socialist countries are not totally different. If you look at countries like China and USSR, even these countries are going through this ecological crisis. Now, Maria Mais and Vandana Shiva, they have already spoken about the sexual division of labor. So, the sexual division of labor is actually looking at production from a female perspective because we all know these kind of systems exist even today where a woman is paid a lesser amount than a man for the very same work. So there is sexual division of labor which is still existing. There is violence against women. So, in her book, Maria Mais finally dreams of a self sufficient, ecologically viable, classless society. So, please remember these terms because these technical terms are very, very important when you write an essay or an answer in connection with a theoretical work. So, a self sufficient, ecologically viable, classless society. This is what Maria Mais had been dreaming about. Now, Vandana Shiva also speaks about the same kind of dream through her narration on Chipko movement, which indeed was talking about forestry, agricultural patterns, water management, etc. Now, here she states technology has only given maldevelopment. So, in one single statement, we realize that Dietrich is not completely favoring technology and scientific development because she argues that this is doing more harm than development, and that is why she calls it maldevelopment. Now, the main causes here they are again patriarchy, capitalism, technology, colonialism. So, all these are connected because when the colonizers came, they actually brought in a lot of advancements, kind of technological advancements. Capitalism came up, automatically, patriarchy was also going along with this. And sometimes the feminine principle that once India believed in, like Shakti, Prakriti, these kind of things are completely forgotten when we talk about modern advancements. So, progress, the term, is becoming more harmful. And capitalism also had its roots in British divide and rule policy. So, even today, when we say there is no discrimination, there is a kind of discrimination that is still existing. In the past, it was known as Sanskritization, which means giving a dominant role for the Brahminical group or the upper class society. We often talk about terms like universalism and nationhood, but unfortunately, there is some kind of Semiticization. For example, Jews and Muslims, they're always considered as the other group. Now, one explanation that she speaks here is the reason that maybe Jews and Muslims have something called the Holy War, which they believe in. So maybe because of this, these groups are considered as a separate category. So this kind of a difference, categorization, discrimination, considering one group as the other is still existent. So the problem is when this happens, these people are considered as inferior groups, and the production power actually gets into the hands of the upper class society. Now, moving on to the next segment, science and technology. So, here is a very simple question: is Western science and technology neutral? Neutral in the sense, is it giving development to all people from all classes? Now, definitely the answer is really confusing because most of the developments reach only the rich group, the upper middle class, and the middle class. Sometimes it never even touches the lower class group. Now, we all know when we talk about technology, when everything came into the online mode, how many students really had a very solid access towards internet. So this is a very simple thing which we can connect here in this context. So this availability of technology or availability of this progress, what we call as progress, is not something which is reachable to all people in all classes. And then comes the question like who controls it and who uses it. If you look at the context of India, it is Shastra Sahitya Parishad, which is actually a very highly authoritative organization which is actually controlling the rules and regulations of science and technology. So there was a wide protest against industrialization in the past, definitely during the Gandhian era. And you might be familiar with Charkha, Khadi institutions and all which Gandhi preached about. But this came to a halt, and technology, there was a green signal given for technology when Nehru came into power. And slowly you can see different kinds of forms of energy came up, like solar energy, nuclear energy. So the problem with this is this can be advantageous, at the same time this can be disadvantageous as well. When we talk about nuclear energy, we know about nuclear explosions, nuclear wars, etc. Now, according to this Asian concepts, this kind of technology is usually more connected with nature. Now, this is what Claude Alvarez suggests in his book. Now, Mais and Shiva, they have argued that Western technology is always patriarchal, which in turn is destructive of nature. Now, what happens here when there is technology and scientific advancement that is coming? There is displacement of women. Now, see, there is displacement of human beings in an overall sense, but more than that, displacement of women when we look at it through a feminist perspective. Now, Renaissance and scientific kind of revolution, they always sided with patriarchal attitudes. Now, Mais and Shiva suggested that patriarchy is a Western tool. Now, this is a point where Diatriche is actually coming with her argument. She denies this. She says this patriarchy had its roots even in India because India had this Varna system or the caste system long, long back. And we all know about the witch hunting stories. We know about Sati. You know what sati is? Where a woman is compelled to jump into the funeral pyre of her dead husband. And this kind of a practice came to an end when social reformers like Rajaram Mohan Roy came to the forefront arguing against this. So in India, we never had a very favorable situation, specifically during the independent period, pre-independent period. We never had a very lenient kind of space given to women. Now, again, there is a quote that the author comes up with: if bodies are not equal, how can rights be equal? Now, this is actually suggested by Shankaracharya, as it is pointed out in the text, and the saint here says if bodies are not equal, for example, there is a lot of difference between the body of a man and the body of a woman. So, if these two bodies are biologically different, How can you guarantee the same kind of rights for two different bodies? Now, see, this is a statement which is actually very anti feministic in nature, and this is definitely going to be questioned by feminists. So, this was a kind of logic that people had. So, discrimination existed in India long back, and it is still existing. The best example is a very recent movie of Mammootty. This is something which we had already discussed in class once. The title of this movie is Puru. If you get a chance, please do watch it. And the hero of the movie is Mammootty. So, this again speaks about the intolerance that we have in our society, the kind of caste system that is still retained in our minds. Caste system is completely taken away. If you read books, if you speak about rights and regulations, yes, there is no caste system that is existing as of now. But if you look at the attitude of the people, it is still practiced everywhere, at least in the attitudes of many people. And that's why you hear about a lot of honor killings happening in different locations of India. Because one person is getting married to another person in a different caste, there comes an honor killing. So caste system is not completely away from India even today. And in such a situation, when Mais and Shiva suggest that patriarchy is a Western tool and they deny the existence of caste system, Diatriche is completely going against them. Now, coming to the next point, reconceptualizing productivity. So, Mais and Shiva, they redefined labor in relation to productivity. Now, women's work, this has always been invisible, and we all know that, right? The amount of work that women folk might do at our own homes, and what is their payment actually? They're actually taken for granted, right? The kind of work that our mothers do at our homes, the kind of work that we see, even we don't pay them, we don't even show our gratitude because it's taken for granted. A woman is supposed to do all these works. So there is invisibility for a woman's work. Now, productivity, when you talk about productivity on a commercial basis, it is often related to man the hunter. And see, man's productivity is always coming through violence. Now, see, this is a general statement, and boys or men need not get offended based on this because there can be exceptions in all groups, but unfortunately, we are only looking at the generalized kind of statements, right? At the same time, women, slaves, and subjugated people, the work they conduct, they are never considered as productive. Now, production of life is important for production of commodity, which means people should live. There should be a kind of survival happening only when people are alive. We can think of production, we can think of consumers, we can think of goods, we can think of commodity. So, people should be alive. Without that, these things will not hold a value. Now, housewifeification is another problem in the eastern side. Now, this is again something similar to the exploitation by capitalists. So, here on one side it is patriarchy, on the other side, patriarchy is extended to the role of capitalism. Now, when Chipko movement came up, there is a situation that is mentioned by the writer. Many women confronted the forest officers with lanterns during daytime, and when questioned, they said they wanted to bring light to the face of these forest officers, and they used the slogan, "What does a forest bear? Soil, water, and pure air sustain the earth and all it bears." So there is a common notion that Diatriche is coming up with, that women are more closely associated with nature. So if they are given a role in the production process, better environmental management can come, which means there will be a reduction of ecological culture. Moving on, production of life has been boosted by production of profit. So, this is a problem that we face now. Everything is commercialized, everything is materialistic. So, production of profit is the only motive, and that is why men completely ignore women in this aspect. Now, even Karl Marx, in his essay Critique of the Gotha Program, opined that labor is not the source of all wealth. Nature is as much the source. So it is not just human resource, it is not just the power of human beings, but ultimately it is nature which is more powerful, and that is the source which should retain. In the Western countries, there is something called the return of the goddess that is happening, which means Western countries have started imitating the feminine principles that we practiced in India long back. But unfortunately, in India today, the concept of Devi or women as Shakti, as an independent power, this kind of a role is slowly getting curbed. This is not really practiced by people in India. We are following the earlier Western concept, but the Westerners are actually following the past concepts that we retained. So it is in India that we come across this housewifeization and sati. Now, moving on to the next aspects. Now, please understand I'm only going through the key points. Please do read the text to get a deeper analysis. Now, moving on to the next part, this is the energy question. Now, this is again another subheading of the entire essay. Now, in this energy question, we can see a little bit of scientific explanations are coming in. Now, from Shakti, from feminine principle, India has actually moved towards the productive force that is materialistic, totally commercialized, which is just running behind profit. That is profit making. We never think about nature, we never think about managing the environment properly, but we are concentrating more on profit. So we have to overcome the sexual division of labor, and Vandana Shiva tries to reconstruct the existing social issues with immediate effect. She considers the energy issue as mostly Western. So these are some key areas where Diatriche is totally going against their arguments. Now, Diatriche suggests that there is a paper written by John Currian, and this is about overfishing. Now, I'm sure you might be familiar with the terms like trawling. So, trawling is actually a new kind of technology where overfishing is happening. When you use the normal traditional method of fishing using a normal net, natural sustenance is retained, which means only some of the fish will be caught and the rest will be left to sustain, to reproduce, which means they will get enough time to regrow so that the resources can be replenished. At the same time, if you are wiping the entire lot of fish in a sea in one stretch, that sea or that place is going to be dry and vacant forever, because we are not leaving a chance to nature, we are not giving time space to nature to regrow and replenish. So technology needs to respect the time for natural growth, nature's growth. So here there is another important work, and please remember the name of the work, and this is written by Jeremy Rifkin. The title here is Entropy, a New World View. So Jeremy Rifkin says that unlimited growth is actually a myth. There is nothing like unlimited natural growth. Natural resources will be depleted if you take it up beyond limit. Just like overfishing can deplete the sea resources, similarly, any excess amount of working up can definitely affect the growth, the natural growth of any resources. So, unlimited growth is a myth. This is what Jeremy Rifkin says. And he also talks about the law of entropy, which is actually a part of thermodynamics. So, thermodynamics, again, it is a scientific explanation. So, I just would like to remind you of a very simple statement that you might have studied in your school days. Now, the first rule of thermodynamics is that energy is neither created nor destroyed, but It is just transformed from one form to the other. I hope you got the point. I'll repeat. This is something which we have studied in science during our school days. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed from one form to the other form, which means the energy in this earth will always be the same. It is always in a balanced level. It moves from one form to the other, but it is never going to decrease, it is never going to increase. So energy is constant. So this is the first thermodynamics law. But if there is an excess use of these kind of things, maybe an unlimited growth concept, a myth is actually driving us or forcing us to deplete the natural resources, and sometimes from fossil to solar energy we are actually depleting the resources. So what happens if there is a disorder in the energy shift? There is an ecological crisis. I can explain this once again because we already said that energy can only be transformed from one form to the other. We agree on that point. But when this transformation is happening, if it goes in a disordered way against nature, what happens will be the energy that is produced from one source will not be the same thing. For example, available energy, when it is transformed into another source, sometimes becomes unavailable energy. So now you might ask the question, what is unavailable energy? For example, pollution. Pollution from cars, pollution from industries, pollution from chemical factories, pollution from dumping waste in the rivers. All these are forms of energy, but they are unavailable forms of energy. So, energy, when transformed from one form to the other level, we already understood that the energy level is constant. But if it is done in a disordered way against the environmental concept or against nature, the problem that can come is this available energy form will be converted into an unavailable energy form. So, unavailable energy form means you cannot use it. It is not meant for productivity. Now, what can you do with industrial pollution? What can you do with smog? You might have heard about the crisis in Delhi a couple of months back when colleges and schools were shut down because of smog, pollution in the air. So, what do you do with this kind of an energy? This is not productive in any way. So this is what you call as unavailable energy. So this is what Jeremy Rifkin says, entropy. So entropy actually is disorder. So when there is a disorder in the way in which energy is transformed, it is actually becoming useless. From available source, it is becoming unavailable. Now, Maiz and Shiva here, they try to recapture production. Now, population, explosion of population is also another important factor. So, what do you do with this unavailable energy? Some kind of specialization is required to reduce it. Reductionism, that is the only possible option. So this kind of pollution from any source is actually what you call as entropy, which is actually formed out of a disorder. So Diatriche is actually trying to take us back from mechanical to organic level. Right now, we are moving from organical level to the mechanical level. This has to be reversed. This is what she says. So, moving on to the next part, the caste factor. Now, class 2 determines labor. For example, now see, the question will be there in your mind, why is caste coming here out of the blue when we are discussing ecological problems? So, I can explain that when caste factor comes, for example, when there is an intercaste marriage that is coming, if a woman gets married to a higher class man, for example, the term hypergamy is when you get married to a higher class person, usually the woman takes the name of the husband. And there is the problem related with dowry. Now, in all these cases, women are subjugated. So they are actually subjugated and displaced from the context of production. And when they are displaced from production, when men started handling production, it is getting more harmful to nature. Now, Marvin Harris is actually talking about the concept of sacred cow. Now, we all know that how cow has become a holy animal in Hindu culture and Hindu religion. Maybe this was something which got accumulated over the years, maybe thousands of years. Down the lane, it came into such a situation where this animal is treated as a holy animal. So, certain things, when it comes in due precedence, sometimes this can happen. Now, there is also a book by Morton Class, and the title of the book is Caste, The Emergence of the South Asian Social System. So, caste system, intercaste marriage, hypergamy, all these have created upper class control over production. So this is how it is getting connected with ecological crisis, because with all these caste factors, the upper class people will be controlling production, and the problem is when they start controlling the production, it is just going to be materialistic, profit motive, and women will be completely displaced from the cause of production. So the dominant class controls production and removal of women from production. So technology and patriarchy, these two elements have completely negated women to the background. While Vandana Shiva treats caste as non existent. Now, this is one argument Diatriche has got. She says Vandana Shiva talks as if there is no caste system in India, but the foreign author Morton Class is actually looking into it and talking about the caste system in South Asian social concept. Now, there is also another writer, Louis Dumont, who's also talking about purity and pollution. So, what is pure and what is impure? For example, the period of menstruation, the period or the rituals related with death, the period soon after childbirth, all these are questions of confusion, because whether you are pure, whether you are impure, all these things are culturally bound. They are related with religion and cultural aspects. So, this again will affect the role of women in production. So, coming to the final suggestion, Diatriche is not suggesting the unity of all minorities. At the same time, she is not asking for an anti Brahmin approach. What she suggests here is that the dominant class is controlling the production and this has to change. It should come into the hands of women and the lower class population. And she finally says the enemy is our own mindset. So that is why I recommend the Mammootty movie Puru, which you have to watch, because you will understand casteism and patriarchy, they can still exist in our society because it is still remaining in our attitudes. So, coming to the last part, what she envisions here is a sustainable feminist classless society. Now, this is exactly what Miriam Eyes wanted. This was her dream. Now, what are the material and cultural skills of a woman for society? So, we need to understand that we need to overcome sexual division of labor, and ecologically useful skills of women should be strengthened. Now, for example, at one point of time, there were a lot of women working with a pottery, making this kind of Kerala oriented stuff. Again, there were a lot of women working in Kutambuli, the Kerala sari, those kind of concepts. But today, with the coming up of machinery, technology, and many other kind of advancements, their roles have been completely negated. Similarly, if you look at Tamil Nadu, there is something called Karagatam. Now, Karagatam is actually a dance. It is a performance by filling a pot with water, and they will keep it on their head, and without a single drop falling from the pot, they would be dancing. Now, this was actually a specific skill that women had, but today this Karagatam is completely commercialized. the quality of the skill is completely uprooted. So, rediscovering the hidden potentials for women in religion, in society, and culture is important, because only then women will have a role in the part of production, because thereby, if women will be there in the role of production, a sustainable environment can be built up. At the same time, a classless society can also be formed. So there should be a concrete struggle to overcome violence, patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism. So, with this, we come to the end of the session. So, if there are any more queries, if you have got any suggestions, please do not hesitate to connect with me. So, thank you very much. Have a good day. Thank you.